You think it's just a normal school? But 1852, the school built over an older basement city, is a story that was never meant to come out. Beneath the floor is another world. Not one basement, not one room, but whole brick streets, sealed doorways, and staircases that lead into darkness. The janitor says he sometimes hears footsteps where no one could possibly be. A history teacher finds a line in an old journal. Do not go down, forbidden. Then one detail changes everything. On the school's old blueprints, there's a blank space, like someone deliberately cut part of the map out. And there's another. Kids sometimes draw the same picture, a long underground corridor, even though no one ever told them about it. Why does this basement city exist at all? Who built it? And why hide it under a school? And the biggest question, if there really is a whole level down there, what's still waiting in the dark, hoping no one disturbs it? I wasn't looking for a buried city when I started this investigation. I was looking for building permits. Specifically, I wanted to understand why a small town school built in 1852 had basement walls thicker than the foundation should ever need. It was supposed to be simple, an architectural question. The kind of thing you chase for an afternoon, find a boring answer, and then forget. That was 11 months ago. What I found instead was a door that shouldn't exist. It was tucked behind a set of stairs that were added decades after the school was built. A door that leads somewhere the blueprints insist is solid ground. The janitor who showed it to me has worked at the school for 31 years. He told me something I haven't been able to shake since. I don't go down there anymore, he said. Not since I heard footsteps. Not above him, not beside him, below him. In a space that, according to every official record, contains nothing but dirt and old pipes. He unlocked the door anyway, for me. Not because he was brave, because he was tired of being the only one who knew it was there. The first thing that hit me was the temperature. The school's main basement holds steady at about 58 degrees, normal for underground spaces in this climate. But the air coming through that doorway was colder. Clean, sharp cold. The kind that doesn't feel like deep, it feels like open. The second thing was the brick. Not the same brick as the school. Older, darker. Set with a style I would later learn was common here, just not in 1852. More like the 1820s, maybe earlier. And then there was the echo. In a small room, your voice dies fast. Close walls eat sound. Low ceilings trap it. But when I spoke in that doorway, my words didn't drop. They carried. They traveled. They came back from somewhere I couldn't see, somewhere farther than the flashlight beam could reach. I wasn't standing at the entrance to a storage closet. I was standing at the mouth of a corridor. A real corridor, wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The ceiling was too high to be accidental, too clean to be just unfinished basement space. The walls weren't rough foundation work. They were finished. Intentional, built for movement, built to be used, and they stretched into darkness. I want to be careful here. I'm not telling you I found a lost civilization. I'm not selling you ancient giants, hidden empires, or anything that makes people roll their eyes and click away. I'm telling you what I saw, what I measured, what I photographed, what I can document without asking you to just trust me. This corridor exists. It predates the school, and someone went to real effort to hide it. The janitor watched from the doorway as I took my first steps inside. He wouldn't follow. In 31 years of working above this space, he'd only been down here twice. Both times he said he felt watched. Not in a dramatic way, not like a ghost story, like a presence you can't place, like you're in someone else's territory. I asked him why he'd never reported it. He laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. It was the laugh you hear when someone has already tried the right way and learned what it's worth. I did, he said. In 1994, they sent someone from the district office. He looked around for maybe 10 minutes, said it was probably old coal storage, and told me not to mention it to anyone. Said it might worry the parents. Coal storage, with finished walls, with that kind of echo. With vents I could already see disappearing into the ceiling. Vents that didn't just air out a basement, but ran deeper, like they were feeding something beyond the school. Did you believe him? I asked. The janitor didn't even hesitate. I believed he wanted me to stop asking questions. So I started asking them instead, because what I found beneath that school isn't a single basement. It's not one room, one corridor, one odd construction detail you can wave away with words like foundation or storage or old methods. It's a system, and the deeper I went, the clearer it became. Someone had been here before me. Someone had measured these walls. Someone had documented these passages. And then someone made sure the documentation disappeared. The coal storage explanation bothered me for days, not because it was impossible. Coal storage was common in the 19th century buildings. Schools needed heat. Basements held fuel. A simple, boring answer to a simple, boring question. But coal storage doesn't require 8-foot ceilings. Coal storage doesn't need finished brick walls with decorative archwork. And coal storage definitely doesn't explain windows. I returned to the school 3 days later with better equipment, a proper measuring tape, a camera built for low light, and a question I couldn't shake. If this was just a basement, why didn't it match the building above it? The school itself is well documented. Built in 1852, expanded in 1887, partially rebuilt after a fire in 1923. 3 distinct construction phases, each one with its own architectural fingerprint. The main basement reflects that history perfectly. You can see where the original foundation meets the 1887 addition. You can trace the 1923 repairs in the newer mortar, in the slightly different brick color, but the corridor behind the janitor's door doesn't match any of these phases. The brick stamps are wrong. I spent 2 hours photographing every visible stamp I could find. In the 19th century, brick manufacturers often marked their products. Those stamps can tell you who made the brick, where it came from, and roughly when it was fired. In the school's known basement, the stamps line up. Neatly, 3 different manufacturers matching the 3 building phases. In the hidden corridor, the stamps point to a 4th manufacturer, one whose marks show up in regional buildings from the 1810s and 1820s. That's roughly 30 years before the school was built. A local historian I consulted tried to calm me down. Old buildings have weird basements, she said. Builders reuse materials. They incorporated existing structures. It doesn't mean anything mysterious. She wasn't wrong. Builders did reuse materials. They did fold older work into newer projects. But they didn't usually incorporate an existing structure that was larger than the building they were putting on top of it. Because as I mapped the corridor that first week, the coal storage story finally collapsed. The underground space extends beyond the school's footprint, not by inches, by dozens of feet. The school sits on a lot that measures approximately 200 feet by 150 feet, standard for a municipal building of its era. The official basement occupies maybe a third of that footprint, directly beneath the main structure. The hidden corridor runs northwest. I followed it for nearly 90 feet before I hit a wall of newer brick, cleaner, tighter, obviously added later, sealing something off. When I pressed my ear to that wall, I could hear air moving on the other side. More space, more corridor, more of whatever this was built to be. And then I found the first sealed archway. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't hunting for it. The wall looked continuous until you noticed a slight shift in mortar color and the faint outline of what had once been an opening. Someone had bricked over a doorway, not during the original build, later. Deliberately. I counted 7 sealed archways in that first 90-foot stretch, 7 doorways that used to lead somewhere, 7 routes that once existed, 7 passages that someone decided should no longer be reachable. After I sent the local historian photographs of the stamps, she stopped returning my calls. But a structural engineer I contacted had a very different reaction. He studied my images for a long time, then said it plainly. This isn't foundation work. This was built to be occupied. Occupied by whom? And why bury it under a school? The structural engineer's words stayed with me. Built to be occupied. Not built just to support something. Not built just to store something. Built for people to exist inside, to walk through, to use, to return to. So I did what any reasonable person does when confronted with a space that shouldn't be there. I measured everything. I came back with a laser distance meter, a spirit level, and graph paper. If this corridor was going to give up its story, it would do it through measurements, through hard data. Because numbers don't care what anyone wants this place to be. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't have motives. Numbers just are. The ceiling height in the school's main basement averages 7 feet 2 inches. Normal for a 19th century utility space. Functional, practical, built to hold pipes, furnaces, storage, nothing more. The ceiling height in the hidden corridor averages 9 feet 4 inches. Not in one spot, consistently, for the entire 90 feet I could access. 9 feet 4 inches. The kind of height you expect in a formal parlor from that era, a bank lobby, a courthouse hallway. Spaces meant to feel open, spaces built for people, for traffic, for presence. So, why would anyone build coal storage with the proportions of a courthouse? Then there was the wall thickness. In typical basement construction, load-bearing walls are usually 8 to 12 inches thick. Enough to support what's above, enough to survive. Nothing extravagant. The walls in the hidden corridor measured 18 inches at their thinnest point, 22 inches near the sealed. Archways. These weren't walls built to hold up a school. These were walls built to outlive it. I documented the floor next. Beneath decades of dust and debris, I found something that stopped me cold. The surface wasn't poured concrete, and poured concrete wouldn't have been common here until the 1870s anyway. It wasn't packed earth, the cheapest and most common option for underground spaces. It was laid stone, flat, even, carefully fitted. The kind of precision that takes time, skill, and money. The kind of floor you build for a street, not for a basement. After that, I measured the grade. I used the spirit level at multiple points along the corridor, checking and double-checking because what I was seeing didn't make sense. The floor sloped gently downward as it moved northwest, away from the school, a grade of roughly 2%, barely noticeable underfoot, but unmistakable on a level. Basements don't slope away from buildings. Water management alone makes that reckless. You'd be guiding groundwater toward your own foundation, a slow disaster built right into the design. Unless the slope wasn't designed for the school at all, unless it belonged to something older, something planned with a different purpose, with drainage running in a different direction, long before anyone put classrooms above it. But the part that troubled me most wasn't the ceiling, or the walls, or even the floor. It was the vents. I found 4 of them in the section I could reach, metal grates set into the ceiling, eaten by rust, but still clearly part of a system, not decoration, not an accident. When I held a lighter under one, the flame bent sideways. Air was still moving, still flowing, still connected to somewhere. I traced their direction as best I could. They didn't climb upward toward the school. They ran horizontal, parallel to the corridor, heading straight toward whatever lay beyond the sealed brick wall. A ventilation system. For coal storage. A ventilation system that predates the building above it. A ventilation system that still functions, still breathes, still connects to spaces no one will admit are there. That's when I understood what the numbers were doing. They weren't proving one strange detail. They were building a case. Not a complete story, not yet, but a clear contradiction to everything the official records claimed. This basement came first. The school came later. And someone went to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one ever asked why. The measurements told me what the space was. They couldn't tell me when. For that, I needed paper. Old paper, the kind that sits in county archives and historical society basements, waiting for someone stubborn enough to ask for it, and patient enough to read what no one reads anymore. So I started with maps. The earliest town survey I could track down dated to 1838, 14 years before the school was built. The document was fragile, hand-drawn, and painfully imprecise by modern standards. But it showed one detail that hit me so hard, I drove back to the school the same afternoon. The lot where the school stands today wasn't empty in 1838. Something was already there. The notation on the map was faded, almost erased by time. I spent 2 hours with a magnifying glass before the words finally came into focus. Municipal Works. That was it. No explanation, no footprint of a building, just a shaded patch, roughly matching the school's current location, like someone had marked the area without wanting to define it. Municipal Works. That vanished from every later map, because the 1847 survey showed the lot as vacant land. The 1851 survey, drawn 1 year before construction began, showed the same thing, empty, available, ready to be developed, as if whatever stood there in 1838 had never existed at all. Next, I pulled photographs. The Historical Society had a small collection of early town images, mostly from the 1870s onward, but one photograph, dated approximately 1869, showed the school from across the street. I almost missed what mattered. The picture showed children in the yard, arranged in neat rows, the kind of stiff posture you see in old-class portraits. Normal, expected. But at the edge of the frame, behind them, you could see the street. And the street was higher than the schoolyard. Not by much, maybe 18 inches. The kind of detail you'd ignore if you weren't already hunting for mismatched ground in hidden spaces. But once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The children were standing in a slight depression. The ground around the school sat lower than the road beside it. Then I found another photograph, taken in 1894, from nearly the same angle. The difference had grown. The street now sat close to 3 feet higher than the schoolyard. A retaining wall had appeared. A practical, ugly strip of masonry meant to hold the road grade back from the school property. By 1912, another photograph showed the gap wider still. The school's front entrance now required steps down from street level. 3 photos, 3 snapshots in time, 1 clear pattern. The town was rising, slowly, deliberately. The streets were being built up, layer on top of layer, while the school stayed at its original elevation. Or, rather, the school stayed at the elevation of whatever it was built on top of. And then I found the confirmation where I didn't expect it, in a newspaper archive. A short notice from 1876 buried in the back pages of the local Gazette. The town council had approved funds for street improvement and grade elevation in the downtown district. The reason was familiar: drainage, mud, sanitation. The same reasons dozens of towns used during that era. The same reasons that raised streets until entire ground floors became basements. The same reasons that buried first stories under new roadbeds and quietly erased the memory of what used to be at street level. That's when the question stopped feeling like a theory and started feeling like a direct line. What if the school's basement wasn't a basement at all? What if it used to be street level? And what if the corridor I'd been measuring wasn't built under the town? What if the town was built over it? The theory was elegant, almost too elegant. Streets rise, buildings sink. What used to be ground level becomes a basement, a process repeated across America during the 19th century. Seattle did it, Chicago did it. Dozens of smaller towns did it too, quietly, gradually, until nobody remembered the original street line. But elegant theories still need proof, and proof meant going deeper. I contacted the school's principal. I explained that I was researching local architectural history. I asked if there were any other access points into the older sections, maintenance corridors, sealed doors, anything that hadn't been opened in years. She hesitated before she answered. "There's a wall panel," she said finally, "behind the stage in the auditorium. Custodians used to store holiday decorations back there, but we stopped using it years ago." Why? Another hesitation, longer this time. The space behind it made people uncomfortable. Nothing specific, just a feeling. We moved the decorations to a regular closet and forgot about it. I asked if I could see it. 3 days later, I stood backstage with a flashlight and a pry bar. The wall panel was painted the same institutional beige as everything else. No handle, no obvious seam, the kind of thing you walk past 1,000 times and never register. But when I pressed along the edges, I felt it shift. The panel wasn't actually attached, it was just resting there, held in place by friction, and by decades of the paint that had slowly glued it into silence. It came free with a sound like tearing paper. Behind it was darkness, and a smell I hadn't noticed in the main corridor. Damp and old, something organic, layered beneath the mineral scent of ancient brick. The opening was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide. I had to turn sideways to squeeze through, my shoulders scraping rough stone on both sides. And then I was inside. Not a closet, not storage, a stairwell. The stairs dropped steeply, cut from the same kind of stone I'd seen. In the corridor floor, dust coated everything. My footprints were the first marks on those steps in what looked like decades, maybe longer. I counted 19 steps before I reached the bottom, 19 steps down, roughly 12 feet of descent, 12 feet below a basement that was already underground. The space at the bottom was bigger than anything I'd seen so far. My flashlight couldn't find the far wall. The ceiling arched overhead in a slow, controlled curve. Brickwork laid in the same pattern I'd seen in photographs of 19th century railway tunnels. Functional, strong, built to span distance without supports. And then I looked at the floor. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. Cobblestones. Real cobblestones. Rounded, worn, uneven in the way stone only becomes after years of traffic. The kind of wear that comes from footsteps, from carts, from wheels grinding over the same line again and again. This wasn't a basement. This wasn't storage. This wasn't foundation work or coal storage or any of the comfortable explanations that make the world stay predictable. This was a street, a buried street, 12 feet below the school basement and 20 feet or more below the town as it stands now. I stood there for a long time, listening to my own breathing echo off walls that hadn't heard a human voice in generations. And then I heard something else. Footsteps. Faint. Rhythmic. Coming from deeper in the darkness. And then they stopped. I didn't investigate the footsteps that night. I want to be honest about that. I stood in the darkness, heart pounding, flashlight beam shaking in my hand, and I made a decision. Whatever was down there could wait. What I needed first was context, history, proof on paper, because before I went deeper into that space, I had to know who built it, and why it existed before the school ever did. The county records office became my second home for the next 3 weeks. Land deeds, tax assessments, property transfers, the slow, unglamorous paper trail that every piece of American soil collects over time, whether anyone pays attention or not. The school lot had a simple history. Everyone knew the official version, purchased by the town in 1851, school constructed in 1852, clean, neat, no loose ends. But deeds go back farther than schools. The 1851 purchase document listed the seller as the estate of one Marcus Whitfield, a name I didn't recognize, a name that didn't appear in the town's official history, not in the commemorative booklets, not in the local museum pamphlets, not in the little timeline everyone repeats. So, I traced Whitfield backward through the records. He'd acquired the lot in 1824, and that deed had one line that changed everything. It described the property as containing one municipal structure of brick construction with associated underground improvements. Underground. Improvements. In 1824, Whitfield himself stayed strangely out of focus. No occupation listed in census records. No death certificate in the county files. No grave marker in any of the 3 local cemeteries I searched. He appears in 1824, buys a property with underground improvements, and then he simply disappears from the documentary record, as if the town collectively decided not to remember him. But the tax assessments told a different story. From 1824 to 1843, the lot was taxed at a rate that suggested real structural value, not a vacant patch of land, an actual property worth money, higher than the surrounding lots, higher than made sense for a site the official history later claimed was empty. Then, in 1844, the assessment dropped dramatically. Not a slow decline, not aging, a cliff. The structure was gone, or buried, or simply removed from the record in the cleanest way possible, by pretending it no longer existed. I found one more piece in the newspaper archive, a short notice in the Town Gazette, dated March 1844, small enough to miss if you weren't looking for exactly this, easy to skim past. The municipal works on Whitfield Lot having been deemed unsuitable for continued public use, the town council has authorized filling and grading of the site. Citizens are reminded that access to the underground portions is hereby prohibited by order of the council. Access prohibited, not demolished, not destroyed, prohibited. They didn't tear it down, they filled it, graded it, buried it, and then, 8 years later, they built a school on top of it. I searched for anything that explained what the municipal works actually were, what they did, why they mattered, why they were suddenly unsuitable. Nothing. No public report. No meeting minutes I could find. No argument in the paper. No explanation that survived. But the church records, gave me one final detail, the kind you only find in a book nobody checks anymore. A baptismal log from 1831 mentioned a ceremony performed in the lower hall of the municipal works, the upper chambers being unsuitable due to flooding. Lower hall, upper chambers. Flooding in the upper chambers. That phrasing sat in my mind like a splinter. How does a building flood in the upper chambers but stay usable in the lower hall? That doesn't fit ordinary architecture, not unless the building extended deep underground, deep enough that lower didn't mean basement, it meant something else entirely. Unless the space I'd been exploring was never meant to be underground at all, unless it was built at street level, and then the street rose around it, or the street was raised around it. At that point, the question wasn't just who built this place. The question was why someone decided to bury it. That church record stayed with me. Upper chambers, flooding, lower hall remaining dry. It suggested something I hadn't fully allowed myself to consider yet. The structure beneath the school wasn't one level. It was multiple levels. And the level I'd been exploring, the corridor with 9-foot ceilings and cobblestone underfoot, might not even be the deepest part. But before I went down again, I needed to understand what I'd already found. So I returned to the main corridor with a single purpose. The sealed archways had bothered me since the first visit. 7 doorways bricked over. 7 passages that used to lead somewhere. But I'd been so focused on where those openings might go that I'd missed something obvious about the corridor itself, the windows. I didn't recognize them as windows at first. They looked like decorative recesses, shallow alcoves set into the brick at regular intervals, the kind of detail you'd expect in a formal hallway. But decorative recesses don't hold glass. I found the first shard, embedded in old putty, hidden under decades of grime, green glass, thick, uneven in the way that instantly marked it as hand-blown. Old glass, the kind you don't see after the mid-19th century. I cleaned the recess carefully, inch by inch, until the outline became undeniable. A window frame, about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, placed at what would have been eye level for an average height adult. A window in an underground corridor, a window that now faced a brick wall, except it hadn't always faced a brick wall. I examined the exterior surface around the alcove. The brickwork there was different, newer, tighter, the same kind of brick I'd seen in the sealed archways. Someone had bricked these windows over from the outside, filling in whatever space had once existed beyond them. Inside, the corridor still carried traces of the past. There were soot stains along the upper edges of the frame, the kind of blackening you get from oil lamps, from candles, from repeated use, from people who stood here often enough to leave marks, people who needed light and needed sightlines, and needed these openings to matter. I found 11 window frames in the accessible section of the corridor. 11 windows, all bricked over, all showing the same soot patterns, the same old glass fragments, the same evidence that they weren't decorative, they were functional. That night, over drinks, a skeptical friend tried to give me normal explanations. Coal storage, he said. Maybe the windows let workers check storage bays without opening doors. Except, coal dust would have coated the glass black. These windows weren't meant to look into grime. They were meant to pass light and visibility. Cellar illumination, he tried next. Windows to bring daylight into underground spaces. Except, these windows didn't angle upward. They faced straight out, horizontally. Not designed to catch light from above, but to look through at something on the other side. Then he settled on the last safe option, later remodeling. Someone added windows, then sealed them when plans changed. Except the frames didn't look added. The brick around them showed the same age and wear as the corridor walls, the same craftsmanship, the same long-set mortar. These windows were original. They were installed when the corridor was built, and they were installed for one reason. When the corridor was built, there was something on the other side worth seeing. Not dirt, not brick, not the solid earth pressing against them now. Something else, something that existed at the same level, close enough for windows to matter, and then was filled in, bricked over, and erased. Those windows remembered a world that no longer existed, a world that didn't just disappear, a world that was deliberately buried. That image wouldn't leave me, a corridor designed for visibility, for connection, for seeing and being seen, now entombed behind brick and silence. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, not just the corridor beneath the school, the whole system. Because if this really was a buried level of the town, it wouldn't exist in isolation. There would be other access points, other remnants, other basements that didn't quite make sense once you looked closely. So I started knocking on doors. The courthouse sits 3 blocks east of the school, built in 1867 according to the cornerstone, solid, respectable. The The kind of building that's meant to say this place is stable, even when the ground beneath it has secrets. The maintenance supervisor was skeptical when I explained what I was researching, but curious enough to show me their basement. The moment I saw the walls, my stomach dropped. The same. Brick pattern, not similar, identical. The same distinctive arrangement I'd documented under the school, the same manufacturer's stamps from the 1810s and 1820s. And in the far corner, partially hidden behind a modern electrical panel, I found another sealed archway. The courthouse basement connected to something, or it had once. I went back to my notes and started plotting everything on a modern street grid. The school, the courthouse, a church 3 blocks south, where the pastor admitted they had unusual foundation issues. An old bank building, now converted into apartments, where the property manager described a sub-basement that went deeper than it should. 4 buildings, 4 sets of anomalies, all carrying the same construction signatures, all lining up along what would have been the town's original main street. Once I saw that alignment, the pattern stopped feeling like a curiosity and started feeling like a map. So I overlaid the 1838 survey onto my modern grid. The municipal works notation sat near the center, right where it always had. But this time, I noticed something else. Faint lines I'd dismissed before as ink bleed or careless drafting. Lines connecting points across the early town plan. Lines that ran through blocks, not around them. Not streets, not property boundaries. Passages. The old map didn't show one odd basement. It showed a network, a system of underground connections linking major structures of the early settlement. The school lot wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was a hub, a central point in something much larger. I traced those faint lines to their endpoints. One terminated near the old railway depot, now abandoned, at the edge of town. Another ran toward the river, ending at a point that would now be underwater because of a dam built in 1931. A third extended north toward the cemetery, stopping at a structure marked only with a small cross, the cemetery, where Marcus Whitfield had no grave marker. And then the connection snapped into place in a way I didn't like. Because every endpoint had something in common, each one was tied, in the town's official history, to significant flooding, fire, or demolition during the 1840s. The same decade the school lot's tax assessment dropped. The same year the municipal works were filled and graded. If this was coincidence, it would mean believing that natural disasters conveniently destroyed every connection point of an underground network within the same 10-year period. I don't believe in that kind of coincidence. Someone systematically severed this network, cut it off at every endpoint, filled the passages, sealed the archways, buried the windows, and then waited 8 years before building a school on top of the central hub. As if they needed time, as if they needed people to forget, as if they needed the children who might have remembered to grow up and stop asking questions. The network map changed everything. This wasn't a single buried building anymore. This was infrastructure. Civic planning on a scale that required resources, coordination, and a reason. But a reason for what? I went back under the school with different questions. Not where does this lead, but why was this built at all? What function justified this much brick, this much labor, this much deliberate concealment? What I found down there didn't answer that question. It sharpened it. The first discovery was near one of the sealed archways. There was a metal grate I'd noticed before, and dismissed as a simple drain cover, the kind you stop seeing after the first hour underground. But this time, I pried it loose. There was no drain. There was a shaft, vertical, carefully lined with the same brickwork as the corridor walls, dropping beyond my flashlight's reach. And it didn't just go down. It went up. I leaned in and looked toward the darkness above. About 20 feet over my head, I could make out the faint outline of another grate, another level. The shaft connected multiple floors of this structure, floors I hadn't accessed yet, floors that might still exist above and below me. So it wasn't drainage, it was ventilation, or it was something designed to move something else through the building, unseen. Once I noticed the first shaft, I started finding them everywhere. They appeared at regular intervals along the corridor, 12 in total, spaced about 15 feet apart, too many for a casual solution. Too consistent to be random utility access, and the grates themselves were telling. They were heavy, overbuilt, almost ornate, manufactured with a quality that felt excessive for something down in a basement. Each one carried a maker's mark I couldn't identify, a symbol like interlocking circles wrapped around a single vertical line. I photographed the mark and spent 3 days digging through foundry records, patent archives, and industrial catalogs from the era. Nothing. No match, no obvious manufacturer, no satisfying label I could pin on it. Then I noticed the ceramic pieces. At first they looked like broken plaster or chipped tile, white fragments embedded in the walls at irregular heights. But when I cleaned one carefully, it revealed a glazed surface and a clean fracture line, like it had once been part of a larger component that protruded into the corridor. Insulators. That was my first instinct, the kind used for telegraph wire runs or early electrical systems. But telegraph service didn't reach this town until 1858, 6 years after the school was built, and long after the underground network was supposedly sealed. And these ceramic fragments weren't added later. They were set into the brick when the mortar was still wet. They were part of the build. So, what does that imply? Not magic, not lost. Super technology. Just a hard, uncomfortable fact. These components exist, they were installed deliberately, and they serve some function, even if no one can tell me what that function was supposed to be. The final discovery came near the cobblestone chamber I'd reached through the auditorium stairwell. A metal plate was set into the wall, corroded green with age. I scrubbed it gently, expecting nothing. But under the corrosion, stamped letters emerged, a manufacturer's name, a city, a date. The city was Philadelphia. The date was 1819, 33 years before the school was built. Whatever this underground system was, it wasn't improvised storage. It wasn't a quick reuse of old foundations. It was planned, manufactured, and installed with components shipped from hundreds of miles away, and that made the question burn hotter than ever. Why build something this strong? Why build it this complex? Why hide it this thoroughly? And maybe the most unsettling question of all, what were they hiding it from? I sat with my notes for a week, maps spread across my desk, photographs pinned to every wall, measurements, dates, manufacturer marks, all the fragments I'd gathered over months of digging, measuring, documenting. And slowly a theory began to form. Not the whole truth, maybe not even close, but a framework that fit the facts I could actually verify. It went like this. Sometime in the 1810s or early 1820s, someone built a civic complex in this location. Not a single building, a network. Connected structures linked by underground passages, formal corridors with 9-foot ceilings, cobblestone floors, and windows designed to look into adjacent spaces. Ventilation shafts placed with careful spacing. Sealed archways that once functioned as doorways. A planned community. An intentional design. The exact purpose was still unclear, but the scale pointed to something official, something public, municipal works, as the 1838 map called it, a system meant to serve the settlement in some organized way. Then something changed. In the 1840s, the system was shut down, not slowly, not through neglect, deliberately. The archways were sealed, the windows were bricked over, the passages were filled, surface structures were demolished or buried beneath rising street grades until the town above could pretend it had always looked that way. By 1851, the lot appeared vacant on paper, ready for new construction. Then the school went up in 1852. Its builders were either unaware of what sat beneath their foundation, or they knew exactly what was there and were instructed to never talk about it. This theory explained the buried windows. They once looked into rooms and chambers at the same level, spaces that are now filled with rubble and dirt. It explained the ventilation shafts. A complex of occupied underground spaces would have needed air, especially if people spent time there. It explained the cobblestones, not a weird basement floor, but a surface meant for movement, internal streets, corridors linking sections of a larger whole. It explained the 1844 newspaper notice, access prohibited, not destroyed, not removed, prohibited. The structure remained, the town just declared it off limits, and it explained the rising street levels. The easiest way to bury something isn't to erase it, it's to build over it, raise the grade, add layers, let construction do the hiding, and let time do the forgetting. For a moment, the theory felt solid, almost comfortable, too comfortable, because it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain why the system was abandoned, what made the municipal works unsuitable for continued public use after roughly 20 years. The 1844 notice gave no reason, no public report, no clear trigger, no mention of fire, flood, or structural collapse in any record I could find. It didn't explain Marcus Whitfield. Who was he really? Why did he own the central hub of this network? And why does he vanish from the record after 1844, like someone scrubbed him out? It didn't explain the technology. The ceramic components set into the original brickwork, the iron grates with a maker's mark I couldn't identify. The Philadelphia plate stamped 1819, years before the town was officially founded. And it didn't explain the footsteps. I'd heard them once. The janitor had heard them more than once. Something moved down there, in corridors that were supposed to be sealed, abandoned, forgotten. So, my theory was a skeleton. It needed flesh. It needed answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask yet. And those answers, I suspected, weren't waiting on my desk. They were waiting deeper, below the cobblestone street, below the level I'd already mapped, in whatever lay beneath. The theory held for 11 days. Then the county archives handed me a document I hadn't even asked for. A clerk found it misfiled inside a stack of unrelated property records. She said it reminded her of what I'd been researching, and she thought I'd want to see it. She was right, and it shattered everything I thought I understood. The document was a renovation report dated 1889, 37 years after the school was built. A structural assessment commissioned by the town council when they planned the 1887 expansion. The engineer's notes were meticulous. Foundation measurements, load calculations, soil composition tests. Standard procedure for a serious construction project. But one paragraph stopped me cold. The sub-basement level, constructed during the 1871 drainage improvements, continues to show moisture infiltration. Recommends sealing the connecting passage to the older foundation sections to prevent further water damage to the main. Basement. Sub-basement level. Constructed in 1871, not 1819, not the 1820s. 1871. That's 19 years after the school was built. I read the paragraph again, and again. The words didn't change, and neither did the phrase that mattered most. The connecting passage to the older foundation sections. So, yes, there were older sections. My theory wasn't completely wrong, but the corridor I'd been exploring, the one I'd been dating to the 1810s based on brick stamps and construction style, had apparently been connected to work done in 1871. The timeline collapsed. I contacted another structural engineer, different from the first one, someone with specific expertise in 19th century municipal construction. She reviewed my photographs for 2 days before she called me back. "You have a problem," she said. I already knew that, but then she explained why. "Your dating method is solid. Those brick stamps are definitely early 19th century. But the arch construction technique in your photos wasn't common until the 1860s, and some of those mortar joints show Portland cement characteristics that didn't become standard until the 1870s. Multiple construction periods. That's what she was telling me. Not one clean, buried complex from a single era, but layers, additions, modifications spanning decades. Someone was building down there, she said. Not all at once, over time. They kept adding to it, after the school was built, after the lot was supposedly sealed, graded, and forgotten. I pulled renovation records for every documented construction project tied to the school. The 1871 drainage improvements, the 1887 expansion, the 1923 post-fire reconstruction. Each one mentioned basement work. Each one described modifications to underground, awning spaces, and each one carefully avoided saying what those spaces actually were. Then I found the line that bothered me more than the rest. The 1923 report included a short directive: clinical, cold, final, lower-level access points sealed per council directive. No further documentation required. No further documentation required. Someone had been maintaining these passages, expanding them, using them, for decades after they were supposed to be abandoned. And then, in 1923, someone decided the paper trail should stop. So my clean theory, a buried 19th century civic complex sealed in 1844, wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. The complex hadn't been sealed and forgotten. It had been sealed and continued. Whatever happened beneath this school, whatever these corridors were built for, it didn't end in 1844. And the most unsettling possibility is this: it might not have ended at all. I requested access to the corridor again. The principal didn't return my calls, so I tried the janitor directly. His number was disconnected. When I went to the address I had for him, a neighbor told me he'd taken early retirement, moved out of state, left no forwarding information. 31 years at that school, and he vanished within 2 weeks of showing me the door under the stairs. I went to the school board next, this time with a formal research request. I cited my credentials. I emphasized the historical significance of what I'd documented. I asked for permission to conduct a proper archaeological and structural survey. The response didn't come from the board, it came from a lawyer. The school district has determined that the basement areas in question pose potential safety hazards. Access has been restricted pending structural evaluation. No timeline for completion of this evaluation has been established. Safety hazards, in a space that had apparently been accessed, modified, and maintained, on and off, for more than 150 years. The following week, I drove past the school again. A construction crew was working near the auditorium entrance. I pulled over and asked what they were doing. Sealing up some old storage areas, the foreman said. Fire code compliance. Fire code compliance. The same kind of language I'd seen in the 1923 report. The same tone, procedural, tidy, unquestionable, that so often comes right before the phrase, "no further documentation required." I stood there and watched them pour concrete into the stairwell I had used. The 19 steps I'd counted, the passage down to the cobblestone street, gone, filled, erased. By the end of the month, the wall panel behind the stage would be drywalled over. The janitor's door was already padlocked, the frame reinforced with steel brackets like someone expected pressure from the other side. Everything I'd found was being sealed, not casually, not because it's old, but systematically, like a checklist. I made one last attempt, a Freedom of Information request for any documents related to underground structures on school property. Engineering reports, historical surveys, structural evaluations, anything connected to sub-basement, drainage improvements, sealed access, or lower level. The response took 3 months. No responsive documents found. No documents. For a building constructed in 1852, renovated in 1871, 1887, and 1923, maintained continuously for more than 170 years. No documents at all. I sat in my car outside the county records office and felt the investigation slipping through my hands. The physical evidence was being buried again. The paper trail had been erased, or it had never been allowed to exist in the first place. The witnesses were gone. And one question kept repeating itself, louder every time the silence got thicker. If it's nothing, why hide it? If it's just old storage, just drainage work, just foundation repairs, why send lawyers? Why seal the passages? Why pour concrete into a stairwell that had existed long enough to collect dust like history? Why make a janitor disappear? The silence itself was an answer, just not one I could prove. I spent a month doing nothing, not researching, not investigating, not thinking about corridors and cobblestones and sealed archways. I needed distance, perspective, a way to separate what I knew from what I suspected, and both of those from what I wanted to believe. When I finally returned to my notes, I brought a red pen. Anything I couldn't prove with physical evidence or verified documentation got crossed out. Every assumption, every inference, every leap that felt right but couldn't be demonstrated. What remained was smaller than I'd hoped, but it was solid, the underground. Spaces exist. I measured them. I photographed them. Multiple witnesses saw them before access was sealed. The brick construction predates the school. Manufacturer stamps indicate production dates in the 1810s and 1820s, a claim that can be checked against foundry records and period catalogs. The spaces were modified over time. The 1889 renovation report documents construction tied to the 1871 drainage work. Differences in mortar and technique point to multiple building phases. The town's street level rose significantly between 1852 and 1912. Photographs show a steady elevation of grade around the school property over time. The 1844 newspaper notice exists. It references municipal works, underground portions, and prohibited access. The document is archived and verifiable. Someone systematically sealed these spaces in 1923 and again in the present day. Construction, language, renovation directives, and my own observations all point in the same direction. That's what I can prove. Not a lost civilization, not a conspiracy spanning centuries, not answers to the questions that still wake me up in the dark, just evidence of something that shouldn't exist, something that was deliberately hidden, and something that someone still wants to keep hidden. The red pen erased my theories, but it couldn't erase the facts. Underground corridors with formal architecture don't build themselves. Cobblestone streets don't appear 20 feet below ground level by accident. Windows don't get installed in walls that were always meant to face dirt. And buildings don't get buried unless someone decides to bury them. That's when I realized my mistake. I'd been trying to solve the mystery, chasing the complete answer, the final revelation, the clean moment when everything clicks into place. But some mysteries don't get solved. Some questions don't have answers we're allowed to reach. What I could do was document, preserve, make sure that whatever I'd found didn't vanish completely once the last layer of concrete dried and the last panel disappeared behind fresh drywall. Because the truth is still down there, beneath the school, sealed now, inaccessible, but not gone. I needed context, not for the mystery itself, but for the mechanism. How does an entire level of a town disappear without anyone talking about it like a catastrophe? The answer, it turns out, can be painfully ordinary. Seattle did it in 1889. After the Great Fire tore through the downtown core, planners faced a choice: rebuild at the existing grade, a level that sat too close to high tide and demanded constant pumping just to manage sewage, or raise the streets and start over. They chose to rise. Over the next 10 years, Seattle elevated parts of its downtown by 1 to 2 full stories. Ground floors became basements. First floor. Windows turned into rectangles of darkness, facing retaining walls. Whole sidewalks vanished under new layers of fill, brick, and street. And today, you can tour what's left. You can walk through old storefronts that haven't seen daylight in more than a century. You can pay admission and take photos in spaces that used to be ordinary city life. The buried level becomes a story you can buy a ticket to. Something quaint, something safe to remember. Chicago did something similar after its own fire. So did dozens of smaller towns facing the same list of problems: mud, sewage, flooding, the daily grind of 19th century infrastructure. The solution was blunt and practical. Don't fight the water forever. Don't rebuild the drains from scratch. Bury the problem. Build on top. And the reason people forget isn't complicated. The process is slow enough that residents adjust without realizing they're watching history disappear. A street rises 6 inches this year, another foot. The next. New buildings match the new grade. Old buildings add steps down to their entrances. Doorways shift. Windows become basement windows. Storefronts move upward. The city keeps functioning, so nobody treats it like a major event. Within 1 generation, the old level starts to feel like a rumor. Within 2 generations, people stop believing it existed at all. This was the missing middle I'd been looking for. Not conspiracy, not some dramatic erasure, just urban development doing what it always does. Pushing forward, laying new layers over the last ones, turning yesterday into an inconvenience. Cities grow upward by growing over their own past. But Seattle preserved its underground as a historical curiosity. Chicago's buried sidewalks became legend, then story, then attraction. This town did something different. This town sealed the passages, prohibited access, stopped documentation, sent lawyers when someone asked questions. So, the mechanism of burial was ordinary, the response to discovery was not. Seattle welcomes visitors to its underground. This town pours concrete the moment someone finds a staircase. Why? What makes this buried level different from all the other buried levels across America? What's down there that's worth protecting after 180 years? The context didn't answer those questions, but it reframed them. The burial itself wasn't suspicious. The continued secrecy was. I've made my peace with uncertainty. Not comfortable peace, not the kind that lets you sleep easily. More like acceptance, the understanding that some investigations end without a clean conclusion, and some doors get sealed before you ever step through. Here's what I believe, based on everything I found. The underground spaces beneath that school are real. They were built in multiple phases spanning at least 60 years. They connected to a larger network, one that once linked key buildings across the original town center. At some point, probably in the 1840s, the surface portions of that network were abandoned. The town raised its streets. New construction covered the old. What had been ground level became basement. What had been basement became something deeper. But the underground portions weren't forgotten. They were maintained, modified, expanded. Someone kept using those passages long after they were supposed to be sealed, and someone is still protecting them. That's the two-layer truth. The physical layer, buried streets, corridors, cobblestones, can be explained by ordinary urban development. Cities bury themselves. It happens everywhere. The ground rises. The past gets walled off. New layers turn yesterday into below grade. But the secrecy layer, prohibited access, missing documents, vanishing witnesses, that's something else. I don't know what the original municipal works were meant to do. I don't know why Marcus Whitfield owned the central hub of an underground network and then disappeared from history. I don't know what function justified ceramic components set into the brickwork, ventilation shafts spaced with precision, and windows that once looked into adjacent chambers. And I don't know why a janitor heard footsteps in corridors that, on paper, should have been empty for generations. Those questions may stay unanswered. The physical evidence is sealed under fresh concrete. The documentary evidence has been scrubbed, or never allowed to exist in the first place. And the people who might have known are gone, or silent, or unreachable. But the past doesn't vanish just because we cover it. Somewhere beneath that school, beneath layers of brick, concrete, and institutional silence, those corridors still exist. The cobblestones still carry the wear of feet that walked them long before modern streets were poured above. The windows still face darkness where rooms once stood. The town built over its own history. Then, it built over the memory of that history. Then it built over the questions. But buildings settle, foundations crack, and secrets surface. And children still draw pictures of underground corridors they've never seen. History doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just waits beneath the floor, behind the walls, down the stairs that no longer exist, waiting for someone to dig.